So, good evening, guys. Good evening, everyone. So, yesterday we discussed in the previous session, we discussed what are the goals of performance testing. And today we are going to discuss what are the different types of performance testing. Okay. So, let's understand what are the different types of performance testing. And we'll have one quick assessment followed by one small assessment. I'll show you some graphs and each one of you should identify what that graph represents. What is the performance testing that graph represents. Okay, it will be like very interesting. Don't miss the last 10 minutes of today's session. And also this is one of the important interview questions. In interviews they will ask like, can you draw a graph for load test, or can you draw a graph for endurance test? Okay, or else they may show you some graph and ask you to identify which type of performance testing does that graph represent. Okay, clear guys? So, and also from performance testing point of view, also today's session is very important one. Actually, I had to cancel, but I don't want to cancel because today's is an important session, right? So let's let's get started. What are the different types of performance testing? Okay. So these are the different types of performance testing. Here you see like in this picture, right? We have load testing and endurance testing, volume testing, scalability, spike, and stress testing, right? These are the different types of performance testing. Okay. And I gave a short description over here. In the next slide, I gave a detailed description. Clear, guys? So the first comes load testing. Let me go to the slideshow mode. So first comes load testing. Okay. So load testing is something which we do with expected or normal user load for 1 to 2 hours, right? Load testing is something which we do with expected or normal user load for 1 to 2 hours, right? And endurance testing is a long duration test, right? Basically, endurance means longer duration, durability, right? So which longs for more duration. That is the general meaning of endurance. Now, what is endurance testing? Endurance testing is a long duration test, and how long the test goes should be executed is that depends on the business hours of the application. Endurance test to n hours cheyali anedi application మీద depend ayi untadi. Depends on the business hours of the application. Okay, so soak or endurance test, that is also called as soak test. Both are same, guys. Soak and endurance test are same. These are long duration tests, and the duration depends on the business hours of the application. We'll discuss what is meant by business hours. We'll discuss soon. The next type of testing is stress testing. Okay, so more than normal load on the application. Stress testing is done with more than normal load on the application. Okay. Yeah. The next type of testing is stress testing. Okay, let me go to stress testing. So, and you may get some questions now, like, do we need to do all these types of testing for any application? If you are into performance testing, do we need to do all these types of testing, and do we need to learn all these types of testing? You need to learn all these types of testing. You need to know about them, but you need not do all these types of testing for a single application. Okay, it depends on the requirement of the application. Basically, the first two types of testing, load testing and soak testing, should be done for almost all applications, and the rest of the applications depends on the requirement and the type of the application, right? For instance, stress testing is let's understand first what is stress testing. So stress means, what is the meaning of stress? Overload, right? Yes or no, guys? Right.
Yes.
What is stress?
Yes, sir.
Right. So if we are overloaded, we call that as we are feeling stress, right? So stress testing means the testing which we do with more than normal load on an application, right? And what type of applications require that stress testing is, for example, if you have any travel application like IRCTC or Redbus or any Make My Trip or this, there will be more than normal load on the application during festival days, right? Festival days or vacation. Yesterday or day before yesterday, I read a news that people are returning from vacation or going to vacation, summer holidays and all this, and there is like a huge shortage for bus tickets and train tickets and all this, right? I think yesterday or day before yesterday I read that news. And some people are returning to because work from office is started, right? So most of the people are returning from hometown to their workplaces, right? Hyderabad, Bangalore, and so on. And there is more load on there is ticket scarcity or seat availability, seat scarcity in trains, buses, and all this, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So for these kind of applications like travel applications, or when suppose or if you take like any e-commerce applications like Flipkart or Amazon also, whenever there is a vacation, there will whenever there is a festival, there will be more users using the application, right?
Yes, sir.
Right. So though only those kind of applications require this stress testing. Not all applications require stress testing. Okay. The next type of testing is spike testing. So what is the meaning of a spike?
Sudden rise.
Right. It is a sudden surge is called as a spike, isn't it? A sudden rise or a sudden spike is called as a sudden rise, or a sudden increase is called as a spike, right? And which type of applications? So testing that's testing with a sudden increase in the user load, that is called as spike testing. So the best example that I can give for this is like for IRCTC during Tatkal booking, right? Whenever Tatkal booking opens at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock in the morning for IRCTC, there will be sudden increase in the user load, right? Because
Yes,
all
sir.
these Tatkal quota tickets will be completed in hardly 5 or 10 minutes, isn't it? So everyone will try to access the application exactly at 10 or exactly at 11, right? I think sleeper class opens at 10 o'clock and AC class opens at 11 o'clock, or vice versa. Or did anyone is anyone familiar with?
Yes, sir. Vice versa.
So yeah, sleeper class. So AC class opens at 10 and sleeper class opens at 11 a.m. for Tatkal booking, right? And at that time, like there will be a sudden surge in the user load, right? More number of users try to access the application who are trying to book a ticket, isn't it?
Yes,
Or
sir.
whenever there is a flash sale or big billion sale, right? At that time also there will be a sudden surge in the user load, right? Whenever there is a flash sale or big billion sale and all this, isn't it? So these kind of applications require spike testing. Not all applications require spike testing. Okay. So, but however, so load testing and soak testing are the frequently done types of performance testing for any application. Okay. That's why I marked in a different color, and then these I marked in bold. Okay. And the other types of testing is not so frequently done. These are not so frequently done. That's why I use normal test here. Observe the difference, guys.
Yes, sir.
Right? So volume testing is something which we do with yesterday someone asked some question on these areas, right? Volume testing or database testing, right? So volume testing is the type of testing which is done with expected load and huge volume of data in the database, right? What is meant by huge volume of data? For example, if you are using some net banking application, testing some net banking application, right? So whenever a user does some transaction, right, some records will be inserted into the database, isn't it? Suppose you do some fund transfer, right? So one record will be inserted into the database, or you make some bill payment, utility bill payment, right? Or loan payment or credit card payment. So some records will be inserted into the database. And in that way, like, for each user, one record will be inserted into the database. Now, any net banking application will have lakhs of users, right? Yes or no? When there is less volume of data in the database, database will be faster, right? But as the volume of data is increasing, right, database may become slow, right? The performance of the database may degrade over time with more number of data in the more volume of data in the database, right? And volume testing is something which we do with expected load and huge volume of data in the database. When there are a lot of records, lakhs of records in the database, how is the application performance? To test that, we do this volume testing. The next type of, is it clear, guys, so far?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
And the next type of testing is scalability testing, right? Scalability testing is testing an application to verify how much it can scale. So this is testing an application for future user load. Future user load. For example, Facebook has 30 million users, or Instagram has, say, let's say, some 10 million users. Okay. Now, Facebook has projections that in the next 1 year, their user base will increase to, right now it is 30 million. And let's say like it will increase in the next 1 year, 1 or 2 years, it will increase to 40 million, right? Now Facebook has to test whether their existing infrastructure, whether their existing servers and all, their application can support that future load or not, right? So if they want to test that, right, they do this scalability testing. Clear, guys? So this is testing an application for future user load. And you understood what is meant by scalability, or how much it can scale? What is the meaning of that? Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
And there are few more types of testing. Those are failover testing and capacity testing. Okay, failover testing and capacity testing. So failover testing is also frequently done. So capacity testing is not so frequently done. So let me explain first failover testing. What is failover testing? Okay, so you remember like last year or so we had floods in Mumbai. Yes or no?
Yes,
We had
sir.
floods in Mumbai, and most of the regions are affected with because of those floods. There were power outages for continuously for like 1 week or 2 weeks or so, right? And suppose like SBI, for example, State Bank of India has headquarters in Mumbai. Okay, they have their headquarters in Mumbai, and of course now they might have migrated to cloud. But previously, when they have headquarters in Mumbai, right? They used to have their on-premise servers, means their SBI net banking application, and also like their they will use some core banking solution. Employees will be using some core banking software, right? So all those servers will used to be in Mumbai in the headquarters, right? And what if like there are floods or earthquakes kind of situations, right? And what if there is power outage for 1 week, 2 weeks, or few weeks, or few months, right? Then what in that case what happens, right? They have to continue their business, right? Their business should not be impacted, right, because of power outages and all, earthquakes or floods and all this,
Yes.
right? So for that, what they will do is, for every application they will maintain a backup environment. They will have the main environment in one city, and they will set up some backup environment in another city, another location. Okay, and now this is something similar to our inverter example. Suppose, I think like those who are staying in AP, they're facing huge power cuts, right? Anyone from AP?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
We are seeing a lot of FB posts saying that there is no power for hours together, 3 hours, 4 hours in this peak summer, right?
Mainly night time, sir.
Mainly night times. Okay.
Night times.
So, right. So what do we do in that case? We'll arrange some, like if there are power outages, if you want uninterrupted power supply, we'll go for some
Backup.
inverter as a backup, right? We'll set up an inverter as a backup, right? Now, when you buy an inverter as a backup, right, and you, let's say the electrician technician came to fit it, and right, and he will give the required connections to whatever electrical points you ask, isn't it? And do you wait for, what do you do generally before letting the technician go? Will you wait for like if you want to test whether the inverter is, the connections are given correctly or not, what do you do generally? Will you wait for power outage and next time power పోయేంత వరకు wait చేస్తారా?
No, no.
No, sir. No, sir.
We
Yeah,
manually
what do
do
you do
the
generally? Yes,
We'll switch off the main and we'll test the inverter.
right.
yes, sir.
So we'll switch off the mains power and we will see whether all the inverter connections are working fine or not. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes,
So
sir.
failover testing is something similar to, exactly similar to this. Right? So for any application, any web application or a mobile application, there will be one main environment as well as a backup environments. Right? So whenever the main environment is down for some reason, all the user load will go to the backup environment, right? And as soon as the main environment is up and running, right, your all the load should go to the main environment, back to the main environment, right? So we test this situation. We test whether that failover is happening or not. Understood, guys? That
Yes,
failover is happening or not, means if main environment is down, whether all the user load is going to backup environment or not, right? So because whenever there is some earthquake, see in Japan we have frequent earthquakes, in US we have hurricanes, right? So whenever there are some natural calamities like this, some something which is beyond our human control, right? So but the business should continue, right? The business
sir.
should continue. So we cannot say that as State Bank of India cannot say that because of floods in Mumbai my servers are not working, right? Now what happens, simply like those customers will move to some other bank if the servers are not working. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Right? So to continue the business, to maintain that continuity of business, we call that as COB, continuity of business, right?
Okay, sir.
Every application will have a backup environment. Now what is failover testing, guys? We will bring down we'll start the test, right? We'll start the test initially and bring down the main environment, right? And see whether the user load is going to backup environment and users are getting the response or not from the application. And again, after some time, we will bring back the main environment, right? Now, once the main environment is up and running, all the user load should come to the main environment, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Because main environment will have full scale. It will be a full scale application. Means it will be of maximum capacity, whereas backup environment it will be of less capacity, isn't it? See,
Yes.
if we buy an inverter, we cannot get a power supply for AC and geysers and all this, right?
No, sir.
Right, because we can set up that backup only for some important connections like lights and fans, lights, fans and all this, isn't it?
Few things.
Right. In the same way, your main environment will be a fully blown environment, means full scale environment, whereas your backup environment will be just like it will be a small scale environment. So as and when once the main environment is up and running, right, now the user load should switch from backup environment to main environment, isn't it?
Yes.
Some similar, exactly similar to our inverter example. Okay. So
Okay.
that type of testing to test that failover is called as failover testing, right? This is also one type of performance testing. And capacity testing means testing the capacity of the application. Scalability and capacity testing looks almost similar, but there are slight differences between those, which we will discuss in the coming up sessions. Okay. So these are the different types of performance testing. Now, any queries before we move to the next slide?
No, sir.
So in the next slide,
No, sir.
next two slides I have explained in detail. So first one is load test. Generally, load testing generally simulates current user load on the system, current user load or normal user load on the system, and it is carried out for 1 to 2 hours. Load testing is usually done for 1 to 2 hours. And load testing ensures that the application is stable and can handle expected peak load, right? It ensures, this is the first type of testing, guys, by the way. Load testing is the first type of testing that should be done. And it ensures that the application is stable and can handle expected peak load, right? Are we clear so far?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And yeah, as I mentioned just now, load test is a mandatory test that can be done prior to any other performance test type. The next type of testing is soak test or endurance test. And now this endurance test is conducted for longer durations based on business hours of the application. Let's understand what is meant by these business hours, right? So these, like indirectly this. For example, like if you take any bank, right? So bank hours will be from 10 o'clock to morning 10 o'clock to evening some 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, like that, isn't it? Let's say 4 o'clock. So bank number of business hours is 6 hours, isn't it? If you take 10 to 4, the business hours of that application will be 6 hours. Which one? If the application is, if it is a core banking application. And one more thing is, for your information, we all as end users, right? We all use net banking, right? We use some, if you are using SBI, if you have SBI, we use onlinesbi.com. Or if you have ICICI bank account, we use ICICIbank.com. Right? That is net banking application. As an end user, we use that. Does bank employees use the same application, guys? If you go to a bank to deposit some cash or withdraw some cash, right? Or you want to make some payment, right? Will they use net banking application like us?
No.
No, right? So in India, most of the banks use a core banking application called, anyone? There is one
Financial.
developed by Infosys, which is used as a core banking application. You might have heard this word, right? Finacle software.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So Finacle is a software core banking solution that most of the banks in India use for their operations. Right? This is a core banking solution. Now, bank employees use this application, this Finacle, most of the banks in India at least. Right? And observe here, it is widely used by banks across 100 countries. Okay. Finacle application is used by banks across 100 countries. And Finacle is developed by our Infosys. Okay. Now, let's assume that you are doing performance testing for this Finacle application. Okay. And now, how many hours you have to do this endurance test? So, SOCAR endurance test case. How many hours does the employees use per day? If the
8
banking
hours.
hours are 10 to no, if the let's assume that is the banking hours are from 10 to 4 only. Okay. So then they use for approximately 6 hours, right?
Sir. Yes.
So that is the business hours of that application, which this core banking application, isn't it? That is the number of business hours of that application. Means that application will be used continuously for 6 hours per day, isn't it? So if you are doing a soak testing for that application, for the Finacle kind of application, you have to do this soak or endurance test for 6 hours. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
And suppose if you take some commercial tax application, right? Commercial tax application, for example, or else, let's take, net banking application, for example. We'll take some net banking application. So if you are testing net banking application, if you want to do endurance test, right? So what would be the business hours of the application, guys? How many hours does users normally use in a day? Any net banking
4.
application? Most of the users. You can relate with yourself, like at what time, generally when you use a net banking application, from which time to which time you will be mostly using.
During
Morning 10
daytime.
to
Daytime,
Days
sir.
are date 1 day.
Right. So let's say like 8 o'clock to morning, 8 o'clock to evening, 10 o'clock, right? Night 10 o'clock, you may be using that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Most of the users will be using from morning 8 o'clock to evening 10 o'clock, right? Night 10 o'clock, right? So what is the business hours of the application, guys? In that case, 8 to 12, that is 4 hours.
8 to 12.
14 hours.
14 hours, right? So if you are doing endurance testing for net banking application, right, you have to test it continuously for that much duration, 14 hours or 16 hours. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Or if you are using some, LIC, suppose you are testing LICindia.in website, right? So they may be using from morning 6 to, like, users may be using from morning 6 to like evening 10, like that. That is the business hours of the application. Or if you are using some LIC application used by employees, LIC employees, they will start their day at 10 o'clock. They
10
will close
o'clock.
by
10 to 5.
3:30 sharp, right? So if you go after 3:30, 1 minute, even 1 minute after 3:30, they will not accept the payment, right? Most of you might have experienced this, right? Or any government office. So they will not work for at least 1 minute beyond the working hours. So understood, guys, what is meant by business hours of the application?
Yes, sir.
sir.
So when you are doing soak or endurance test, right, the duration depends on the business hours of the application. And what is the main objective of doing this endurance test is to find out memory leaks or connection leaks, to identify performance bottlenecks like memory leaks or connection leaks. So we'll discuss what is meant by a memory leak and a connection leak in the coming up sessions. Okay. But please understand that each type of testing has a different purpose. Okay. Each type of performance testing has a different purpose. Okay. I'll take a pause here. Any queries?
No, sir.
Okay. The next type of test is stress testing. Stress testing is done by gradual increase of user load until the application breaks. We already discussed stress. Stress means overload, right? More than normal load on the application, right? So how do we do this stress test is by gradually increasing the user load until the application breaks. Until the application breaks means until the application starts.
The voice is not clear, sir.
Is my voice not clear for everyone?
I think some
No,
network.
sir. No, sir. Clear. It's clear.
For me, it's fine, sir.
Okay. No. You see, if there is some issue with my internet connection, I will see a notification here that your internet connection is not stable and vastadana. Right? I will see that message here. So it should be issue on your side then.
Now it's clear. Now it's clear. ఇప్పుడు వస్తుంది
Okay.
correct.
Right.
Thank you.
So stress testing is done by gradual increase of user load until the application breaks. Right? And what is the main purpose of stress testing? It is to identify an application's breaking point. Breaking point means
At which point it will
at
break?
which
I mean,
load, at which user load the application
first-
starts throwing errors.
ఫస్ట్ పాయింట్ మళ్ళీ ఒకసారి చెప్పరా సార్?
Stress testing is done by gradually increasing the user load. Okay, let me give some example. Suppose if your target, you have an application whose target user load is some 5,000, means normally 5,000 users use that application. Okay, now you want to do stress. So if you are doing load testing, right, you will test the application with 5,000 user load for 1 to 2 hours. Right now, if you want to do stress testing, you want to see how the application behaves if more number of users access the application. While its original capacity is 5,000, normal user load is 5,000. Let's say, if 6,000 users or 7,000 users access the application, how does the application behave? If you want to find out that, or at what user load the application starts breaking. Application breaking means simply it starts throwing errors or high response times will go high, right? So to do that, we do this type of testing called stress testing. How do we do that stress testing? We gradually increase the user load until the application breaks. Application breaks means once it reaches the maximum capacity, right, it will start throwing errors. You will see page can't be displayed or internal server error and all this. You might have seen those errors, right? Internal server error or page can't be displayed. So that is the breaking point of the application, means it has reached the breaking point of the application. Clear? So the main purpose of stress testing is to identify an application's breaking point, and response times and error count increases once the breaking point is attained. When do we see that an application reached its breaking point is if we see that response times are higher or error count is increasing. Then we can conclude that it reached the breaking point. It reached the maximum load, it crossed the maximum load. Clear, guys?
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So that is stress testing. Okay. The next type of testing is spike testing. We already discussed that. What type of applications require spike testing? IRCTC like applications
IRCTC, yes.
or e-commerce applications whenever there is a
Limited
flash
time
sale.
to.
Right. So for whatever applications, ఏ applications కి అయితే sudden increase in user load ఉంటుందో expect చేయొచ్చు, for those kind of applications we need to do this spike testing as well. Right? Clear, guys?
Yes.
For whatever applications we can expect
Yes, sir.
sudden increase in user load, right? So we have to do spike testing for those kind of applications also. And spike testing can be considered as a subset of stress testing. And the next type of testing is volume testing, right? Again, like we already discussed this, volume testing is done to verify response times when there is huge volume of data in the database, right? It is also referred to as flood testing. Please remember this, flood testing, volume testing is also called as flood testing. It is used to, volume testing is done to analyze the system performance by increasing the volume of data in the database. Okay. It is done to analyze the system performance. System means application here. To analyze the application performance by by increasing the volume of data in the database. What is meant by volume of data? Simply number of records in the database, that's it. Volume of data means nothing but number of records in the database. Here, guys?
Yes, sir.
Right?
Sir,
And the
can you
next
give
type-
the example for volume testing?
Okay. So volume testing will be done mostly by these banking applications and e-commerce applications. Okay. Mostly by banking applications. E-commerce applications may not be requiring. No, some may be
Okay.
requiring. See, suppose, like I worked for a banking application for Bank of America when I was working for Bank of America. Right?
Okay.
So we used to have a volume, we used to have 2 lakh records in the database every time. At any point of time, the number of records in the database used to be 2 lakh. Right? Why do we require 2 lakh records? I will explain this in detail. Okay. So
Okay.
in database, there will be something called active partition and history partition. Okay. So I'll explain later what is active partition and what is history partition. But if I want to explain in brief, right? Suppose if you try to generate a statement, right? For example, if you try to generate a statement for the last 1 month, you can you can do it easily. Okay, right?
Okay, sir.
Immediately you can generate a statement. But if you want to generate a statement for last financial year or before financial year, last to last financial year, right?
Okay.
So what they do is you have to submit a request and they will send the report later on. Because when we are doing lot of transfers, fund transfers, bill payment and all these days, gradually the volume of data increases,
Some
isn't it?
background disturbance is coming.
What is that?
We are facing some background disturbance.
Yeah, I have muted everyone because there is some background noise. If someone want to speak, like press and hold the space bar to temporarily unmute yourself.
Okay, sir.
Okay, sir.
Right. So what we used to do is, like, we used to keep a cutoff point, like number of records in the database. We used to maintain 2 lakhs in the active partition. Okay. So the latest data used to be stored in the active partition, and old data used to move to the history partition. I'll explain that later, like what is the process of this volume testing, right? How is it done and all this. I'll explain that later. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Bit early to explain now. I'll explain that later. What is the process of volume testing? So here, like volume testing, and see, for example, there is a travel application, right? So for example, the volume number of records should be stored in the database should be 50,000. What we do is we populate some 50,000 records into the database, dummy records or dummy data into the database, and we do that volume testing.
Sir, can we see this testing in shopping malls and education sites?
Shopping malls and
Educational sites.
educational sites.
The students are registered in
Enrollment, sir.
Yes, yeah.
like
There will
MSET
be number of
exams.
right.
Enrollment of applications.
Yes, sir.
Right. Yes. Yeah. It's possible. Yes. Those applications also require this volume testing.
There is a difference between even spike and volume also, right?
Yes, there is a difference between spike and volume. Both are completely different.
But in some cases, even spike and volume also acts as the same, right? For example.
No, volume testing is something which is related to database volume,
Database.
number of records in the database, and the spike testing is something related to increase in the user load. How many users are accessing the application at any given time?
But whenever the user load is also more, then the database will be also increased, right?
User load is different and database is
No,
different.
see, okay, I'll come to his question. So if you are assuming that if there is increase in the user load, number of records will increase, right? But that doesn't happen. So in database, most of the databases, there will be something called active and history partition. Only the latest data will be there in the active partition. Okay, all the old data will be moved to the history partition. It doesn't, there is no relationship between increase in the user load and volume, database volume. No, your assumption is like when there are more number of users, data database record retrieval will be more, right? That's what you are talking about, or thinking about.
Yes.
Along those lines, isn't it?
Yes.
Right. No. So volume testing is something which we do, like see. Okay, I'll give some examples. Suppose in a database you have like 1,000 records. Let's say, for example, you have 1,000 records in the database, right? Initially, and as and time progresses, right, now some records will be gradually added to the database. And when there are 1,000 records in the database, if you execute some query, it will be executed faster, relatively faster. Yes or no? Right? Compared to, so this data is increasing, number of records in the database is increasing from 10,000, 1,000 to, let's say, 1 lakh records, right? Now, if you execute a query or if you want to fetch some data from the database, it may impact the performance. So the increase in the volume will impact the performance, yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Right? So to test that, like whether, to test what is the application behavior when there is large volume of data in the database, we use this volume testing. We do this volume testing. Okay.
Okay, sir.
We'll discuss this. Okay, we'll discuss this later, in detail. And the next type of testing is scalability testing. So scalability testing is performed to identify if the application is capable to scale up in terms of user load. I already explained this, right? So with examples, Facebook, for example, has 30 million users now. And there are estimates that like in the next 1-2 years, like it will have user base of 40 million, right? That means its users base will increase by around 30%, isn't it? Approximately 30%. Now Facebook has to verify, like Facebook has to test whether their current servers can withstand that feature load or not, right? So to do that, they do this scalability testing. How scalable is the application in terms of user load? Okay. And failover testing, I already explained. Failover testing is used to verify the system's ability to continue day-to-day operations while the processing part is transferred to a backup environment. When the main environment is down for some reason, and if the processing is transferred to backup environment, how is the application behaving, or what is the capability of the application, right, to continue the operation, right? To test that, we do this failover testing, right? Yeah, and these are the important types of performance testing, guys. Okay, which are covered in these 2 slides. Can you repeat, like, what are the different types of performance testing that we discussed now?
Stress,
Load testing,
Soap testing, volume
Product
testing,
endurance
type
testing.
endurance testing,
spike testing, scalability
Right.
testing, failover testing.
Failure testing.
Right. So
One by
first, what are the 2 important types of testing that we do?
Load testing and
Load
endurance
testing.
testing.
and soap
Load and
testing.
endurance testing.
Soap or endurance testing.
endurance testing.
Okay. So now let's see I'll show you some graphs. Okay. So identify what type of testing that the graph represents.
Spike testing.
Spike testing.
Observe here. Yeah. Yes. This graph represents a spike test. Observe here. On x-axis, we have test time, right? In most of the graphs, in all these graphs, on x-axis, we have test duration. And on y-axis, we have virtual users or user load, right? Now, if you observe this diagram, so if you assume that this is the normal user load on the application. Let's say this line represents the normal user load on the application. And you see some 2 spikes here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right? So you see some spikes here. So this graph represents a
Sudden
test.
rise.
Sudden rise, there is sudden rise in increase user load, right? Sudden rise in the user load, right? So if you take IRCTC, we'll have one spike at 10 o'clock and then another spike at 11 o'clock, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Right?
Yes, sir.
So when the Tatkal window opens, isn't it? But normally, let's assume that there are 2 lakh users. At that time, there may be more number of users than the normal time during the regular hours, right? So this graph represents a spike test. Next, I am going to the next slide. Is everyone clear on this? Yes, in some
Yes,
interviews,
sir.
they will ask you to draw the graph. They will not show you they may not be showing you the graph and ask you, but they will ask you to draw the graph and graph for a spike test or a stress test or a endurance test and all this. Okay. So you will be able to draw that now, right?
Yes.
Let me go to the next slide. Yes, this one. What does this graph
Load
represent?
testing.
Load testing.
Load
Load
testing.
testing, right? And why does this graph? How does this graph represent a load test? If you observe here,
1 hour.
Normal and
duration.
1 hour.
right? The test duration is mentioned as an hour, right? And here you see virtual users. That is nothing but user load. And one more thing, this is called as. Let me explain this. This is called as ramp up. Ramp up means we gradually increase the user load on the application when we are testing. Gradually increase the user load, and this is called as ramp up time, and this is called as steady state. Steady state. Why this is called as steady state is there will be no change in the user load from here to here, right? And then we will decrease the user load. We will ramp down the users, right? This is called as ramp up, steady state, ramp down. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Next, let me go to the next graph. Yes. What does this graph represent?
Test testing.
Test testing, I think.
Yes,
Right.
stress testing.
Right. So this graph represents a stress test. How can we say that? How can we confirm that?
Gradually increasing the stress.
Right. We just now discussed, right? Stress
Increasing
testing
and
is
decreasing.
So
no. If you gradually increase the user load, that is stress testing is done by gradually increasing the user load, right? So there is no confusion here, right? Between stress and spike test. Observe here, in spike test we increase there will be a sudden increase in the user load and we reduce that load again after some. So we maintain this, we increase the user load for a shorter duration and again we'll come back to normal user load.
Stability.
Again one more spike, right?
Again spike.
Whereas here in this diagram, next diagram, right? So we are gradually increasing the user load. There is no decrease here, isn't it? Right? We are gradually increasing the user load, isn't it?
yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Steady
And
state,
stability.
again increasing the user load. Observe here on y-axis, the virtual users is represented on y-axis. Means user load. This is nothing but user load. Okay. And again is steady state, again ramp up, again steady state. Right? So we are gradually increasing the user load here, right? That's how we do our stress testing, right? That's what we discussed now, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Stress testing is something which we do by gradually increasing the user load, isn't it? Until the application breaks, right? So this graph represents stress test, right? And what does this graph represent?
Soap testing.
So
Endurance.
Sorry,
Endurance. Endurance.
Five
Or
hours.
endurance test. Yes, both are same. Stroke or endurance test. Because you can see here in that on the x-axis you can see test time is represented, test duration is represented, and it is mentioned here as 5H, means 5 hours, right? And what type of testing is this? Observe here, till now on x-axis you always have test time frame, test duration, and y-axis you have virtual users. Now observe in this graph, on y-axis we have data
Volume testing.
right? So this represents
volume testing.
Volume testing.
Volume test.
right? So we are gradually increasing the volume of data, right? We are testing with some huge volume of data in the database. So this graph represents a volume test. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Right. I'll stop it here, guys, for today. So we can discuss if you have any queries, we can discuss and we can close this.
Scalability testing, we have any graph?
What is that?
Scalability testing. For scalability testing, do we have any reference graph there?
No, I don't have a graph for that.
Future.
I will add it. Okay, I'll try to add it.
Okay.
Okay, if you don't have any queries, we'll wrap up for today, guys. Okay, for recording purpose and let me do some self promotion, guys. So like, share, subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you are interested to join live training, guys, for your information, only demo sessions will be uploaded to my YouTube channel as public videos. So once we start the actual sessions, right? I mean, actual tools like Loader and JMeter, right? Those sessions will not be uploaded as a public videos. So if you want to enroll for live training, please contact the number that is being displayed here. Thanks for watching and have a nice day.